The cabin sat at the edge of the woods like it had grown from the soil itself, a modest structure with weathered siding and a front porch that creaked under weight. For years, it had been my escape, a quiet retreat from the grind of city life, tucked far enough away that the HOA regulations seemed like distant echoes. I loved the isolation, the way morning light filtered through pine needles, the smell of damp earth after rain, and the way the wind whispered secrets through the trees. This particular weekend, I had planned to arrive late Friday afternoon, stay through Sunday evening, and return to my routine with nothing more than a few photos in my camera roll and memories in my head. The cabin was normally quiet during weekends, but a subtle tension had been building in the neighborhood for weeks. The HOA board had become increasingly strict about property upkeep, parking, and unapproved visitors, which usually meant friends or extended family. Most of the homeowners played by the rules, but there were a few Karen types who watched like hawks, always ready to enforce compliance. I pulled into my usual parking spot and noted immediately that something felt off. The cabin door, usually locked and silent, was slightly ajar. My stomach sank. I had always trusted my neighbors to respect boundaries, but the HOA was a force I had underestimated. The subtle threat of their scrutiny had escalated over the past year, from passive-aggressive letters tucked under my doormat to detailed complaints about the most trivial things. But this was different. I stepped onto the porch, the boards groaning underfoot. The interior smelled faintly of something unfamiliar, vanilla candles, maybe, but mixed with an undercurrent of perfume that suggested a human presence had been there. My pulse quickened. Whoever was inside hadn't expected me to return early. That much was clear. And given the history of HOA interference, I could guess who might have been involved. Karen, the unofficial enforcer of neighborhood order, had a reputation that stretched far beyond her property lines. She monitored activity like a hawk and had no problem calling authorities at the first sign of perceived wrongdoing. My eyes scanned the living area. There on my couch was a person lounging as though they belonged. The sight sent a mixture of disbelief and indignation through me. This was my cabin, my private retreat, and yet someone had made themselves at home without permission. My mind raced with questions. How long had they been here, and what led them to think this was acceptable? I recognized the aura immediately. It wasn't just a stranger. This was someone connected to Karen, the type of person who believed they had authority by proxy. I could feel my hands tighten at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. Losing composure would only escalate the situation, especially if Karen had indeed called the cops ahead of time. I had experienced HOA complaints before, and I knew how quickly things could spiral. The last thing I wanted was to be caught off guard in my own home, caught in the middle of an overzealous neighbor's vendetta. Slowly, I stepped inside. Each footfall seemed louder than the last, my senses heightened by the tension. The person inside noticed me immediately, but there was no surprise on their face. They looked comfortable, almost smug, as if they had expected this confrontation. The familiarity of their posture, the way they leaned back, crossed one ankle over the other, signaled not just arrogance, but a sense of entitlement. It was infuriating. The kitchen was untouched, the counters clean as though they had been meticulously prepared for my return. Yet, the presence of someone else, someone not invited, made the air feel charged. I could see evidence that they had settled in, a mug left on the counter, a blanket draped over a chair, and a small stack of books on the coffee table. It was clear that whoever was here didn't intend to leave voluntarily. In the corner of my mind, I remembered the messages and warnings I had received about Karen. Her network of friends was notorious for overstepping boundaries. This wasn't just about property rules. This was a power play. Karen's obsession with control extended beyond her lot, and now it had crossed a line. Someone had been sent to assert authority in her absence, perhaps hoping I would retreat or avoid confrontation. I took a deep breath, forcing my thoughts into clarity. My cabin was more than just wood and nails. It was my sanctuary. No HOA rule, no Karen, and no proxy enforcer would strip me of that. My first priority was to assess the situation without escalating it unnecessarily. I needed to know if the person intended to leave, if this was a misunderstanding, or if I was walking into a full-blown dispute orchestrated by the neighborhood's self-appointed morality enforcer. From the doorway, I surveyed the room again. Every item, every slight disturbance told a story. Whoever had been here had taken care to make themselves comfortable, but not reckless enough to destroy property. That suggested planning, not an accidental intrusion. My pulse steadied, my mind began to plot. There was a rhythm to these situations, an unwritten protocol response. I wouldn't call the cops immediately. I would gather evidence of the intrusion first. Photos, notes, anything that could demonstrate what had occurred before authorities arrived or Karen made her appearance. I moved cautiously through the cabin, noting everything in a methodical sweep. The books on the coffee table were titles I recognized from my own collection. This person had touched my belongings. Every fiber of my being wanted to confront them, demand an explanation, and reclaim my space, but I knew patience would serve me better. It was then I realized that time was against me. Karen's calls, her influence, and her penchant for drama meant that if anyone arrived, the situation could explode in ways I wasn't prepared for. I needed to document, prepare, and anticipate her moves. But before any escalation, I had to deal with the immediate presence inside my home. This intruder was the first barrier, the first line of confrontation in a saga I knew would spiral into a full neighborhood spectacle. I positioned myself in the living room, keeping a safe distance while silently taking note of surroundings. Every object, every detail mattered. The intrusion was not violent, but it was invasive. The person's calm demeanor spoke volumes. They were aware of the tension they created and were clearly deriving satisfaction from it. The situation was delicate. Any rash move could provoke a reaction, but inaction would signal weakness. As the sun began to dip behind the pines, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, I realized that this was just a beginning. Karen's network had already set the stage for conflict, and my early return had inadvertently become the catalyst. The story of my cabin, once a quiet retreat, was now entwined with the vigilant eyes of the HOA and the overbearing presence of its most notorious enforcer. I exhaled slowly, tried to steady the rapid thoughts racing through my mind. There was no immediate solution, only strategy, observation, and anticipation. Whoever had settled in was not leaving without prompting. And Karen, when she discovered the situation, or perhaps orchestrated in the first place, would escalate matters in ways I could already foresee. This was more than a mere trespass. It was a calculated test of boundaries, a challenge to my autonomy, and a stark reminder that in HOA territory, even the most private spaces could become stages for drama. I braced myself for what was coming, knowing that reclaiming my cabin would demand patience, precision, and a readiness to face whatever antics Karen had planned next. By late afternoon, the tension inside the cabin had shifted into a slow-burning standoff. The uninvited guest, once confident and smug, now moved with caution, aware that I had arrived early and noticed everything. Every item they touched, every subtle arrangement, had been silently cataloged. I kept my distance, observing patterns, noting behaviors, and quietly asserting ownership without confrontation. The energy in the room had changed from surprise and entitlement to uncertainty. Outside, the wind stirred the pines, carrying the scent of approaching evening. I could sense Karen's influence looming somewhere beyond the tree-line, a specter of control that had set this chain of events in motion. But for now, the cabin belonged to me, even if temporarily shared. The uninvited guests shifted in their seat, the first cracks appearing in their composure. As the sun began to dip low, casting long shadows across the floorboards, I realized that the weekend retreat I had envisioned had transformed into a careful negotiation of space and authority. The intruder was not leaving on their own, but the balance had subtly tilted. I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that patience, observation, and strategic calm had begun to reclaim my sanctuary. The evening settled into a tense quiet, a temporary pause before the next moves unfolded. The story of my cabin, once a private retreat, had now entered a new chapter of HOA-driven drama, one that would demand vigilance, preparation, and careful navigation.